For the last couple of years, I've been talking mainly about synthesis strategies in geodesign. And today's talk is going to be very, very different. And in a sense, it's a critique of what most of us are doing, which I think is too static and too simple. And I've been working and thinking very hard in the last couple of months about the problem of the dynamics of the real world versus the static aspect of the analysis and design that we do. And what has to be done to make the technical support and the thinking in geodesign more reflect what actually happens in the real world. In a sense, I'm not interested in the computer scientist's view of the world. I'm interested in the designer and planner's view of the world who's actually active in it and working from the perspective of the designer rather than the perspective of data, GIS, geography, the sciences. And so, in a sense, I'm taking a minority view, perhaps, but it's nonetheless my view. And my talk is going to take a certain amount of time, half of it, and then I'm going to show 4 examples, not me, they are going to show 4 examples of dynamics in play, selectively, given the problems that they were facing. The talk is likely to take altogether about an hour and a quarter, not much longer than that and not much less than that. And I can tell you that the $50 and $100 seats are here in the middle, and the people in the back, there are a bunch of graphics in this that you simply won't understand if you're far away. And now's the time to change if you want to, but if you have to leave promptly at 6 o'clock, stay where you are. The term geodesign dynamics is not my invention. It was when I gave a lecture in Madrid, Spain, a couple of years ago. A colleague, a friend of Arantxa's and mine, came to me and said, you know, what you're doing is adding dynamics to design. And I said, that's an interesting set of words, geodesign dynamics, and I've never forgotten it. But nobody's ever defined it. So try number 1. Geodesign dynamics are concepts, they're ideas which relate change in geodesign to its changing system's context. In other words, the important point is any change you make changes everything, except we don't update, we don't iterate the stuff that we begin with when we make a design, usually. Some do, most don't. And they require technical support. In other words, the technical support grossly lags even the best of it, how decisions get made in the real world. They have time, they have cost, they relate to each other, they're cross-system impacts. We're not working that way. We're working pipelines still. And I started listing all the ways that I could think of, and I've got about 15. And I'm going to show 1 or 2 slides to identify what I mean by these dynamics. And then we're going to show 4 case studies, and there's a 5th that is on the regular program, Allison's project and Rosanna's in Chatham County. Tim is going to talk about Seattle's sustainability, Prashant about making a plan for a World Heritage Site, Orla, who I have on videotape, is going to talk about villagers making their own design with no professional help. And Barty is going to talk about the character of a valley which is being suburbanized. And Allison has to worry about the doubling of savanna under climate change. And as I talk about these ideas, the bottom are the lessons to be learned. A very primitive view, a first draft type view. First of all, we have to recognize that people have differing priorities, but should ultimately agree. That's important. It's really important. It means one designer making one design will never solve the problem. Period. We have to enable varied decision models to define change alternatives and to enable informed negotiation. The end game of geodesign will always in the real world be negotiation. It's not picking the best design from some. It'll be combining ideas and making a new version. It's a messy process. It's a human, social, political process. It's not your brilliance, it's their decision. We have to apply geodesign in varied cultures because they operate differently, and among people with varied local and technical expertise. It's purposeful that we have a case study by villagers, and it's purposeful that we have various professors and professionals doing different kinds of projects. They vary. And we have to assure that every aspect of geodesign support is easy to learn, easy to use, and most importantly, easy to understand. Some of these images are not new, but I'm bringing them up when I want to. I think that architects, landscape architects, do this really, really well. I don't think they need geodesign. I think scientists do this part at the far end really well. They don't need geodesign. Where you really need it is where the designers and the scientists have to come together, and that is these large projects which are semi-private, semi-governmental, semi-individual, semi-tribal, and they have to collaborate. And therefore, geodesign has to be adaptable to varied content in studies and projects. You don't know when you're learning something about geodesign or setting up tools for geodesign, you have no idea what people are going to do with it. So it has to be fundamentally adaptable, which means you have to have empty boxes that people fill in and links to services that they need. You'll never build the ultimate geodesign tool. It will never happen. The dynamics of content size and scale. Whatever scale and size and content you're working with, make believe you're here. It affects this one, and it affects that one and that one in the future. And indirectly, it goes out and down and up and down in scale and out in time. But you'll never do a project where you don't have to look up and down zooming. It won't happen. If you really think about the problem, you always have to work at least 3 scales. And that's actually not so simple. If you're making a master plan for Wormsloe State Park, like this, you have to look at the county. But the county is one of several in the coastal zone which is going to be inundated a meter by climate change. So how does Wormsloe, which sits at the cusp of the climate change, not study climate change at the coastal zone level, at the county level, before it deals with its own master plan? Makes no sense. So flexibility of scale, flexibility of models, iterative scale changes. It's very, very important. The dynamics of time and uncertainty. One of the things that's true if you're looking at large projects that have long time is you haven't the foggiest real idea of what's going to happen in the future. So you have to do several designs and try to figure out where truth lies without knowing where it lies. Other people will decide that. But knowing that whatever you decide, the same issue will occur next time. So this design has to be flexible to the possibility of those designs having flexibility. So precision is probably a wrong-headed view. It's probably strategics that are important more than precision. Precision is, there's an old rule, Costanza's law. He's not the first one. The more precise you are, the more wrong you are. All right? I'm a male, but I'm not 6'9". Yeah. The dynamics of timing and sequence. Every act you make in a design is a function of what happened before, what happened nearby, and what's going to happen next, maybe. And what that means is that, like in Go, in the game of Go, or in music, or in war, or in chess, you make a move by reanalyzing the evaluation models as a function of the previous moves in the game. You certainly don't make an analysis map and keep it for a whole design. That's dumb, because it's changing under your design. And here's a very, very simple example. The chicken and egg. Which comes first, the highway or the shopping center? The sewers or the city? Here is 2 maps. The evaluation map for highway. Green is good, red is bad. And the evaluation map for the shopping center. Green is good, red is bad. Let's say the highway goes first. There's my highway. And now I've got to get a shopping center built. And this was the first version for the shopping center, but because the highway is there, it's changed, you will note, to this. And now I can put my shopping center. In other words, that move updates this map. Not its map, but the other maps. And if you reverse the process, the shopping center goes first. There it is. Now I need a highway. But the first highway map would have put the highway there. But now the shopping center is there, but the highway has to go there. And those two designs are different. They're not the same. That's as simple as it gets. And now you've got 50 designs, 50 things in your design. And you probably ought to update your evaluation map 50 times. Not once, but 50. The dynamics of system interaction. I've purposely taken these diagrams from Google Images. The upper left one says, we know that these activities or these models relate to each other, but we don't know where they are, we don't know how much they are, we don't know if they're good or bad, but we do know they relate. They're boxes with arrows. The upper right one says, we know these processes relate, and they relate in geography. Downhill, uphill, near water, in the wind. But we don't know how much, and we don't know how good or bad it is. The lower left says, we know these processes interact, and we know roughly whether it's a beneficial or a harmful reaction, and we know by the size of it whether it's relatively much or little. And the fourth one says, we know they interact, and we know where, in geography, under the water, on the surface, above the water, which may mean we need three-dimensional diagramming and three-dimensional design in the first place. And we know how much. And I think the fourth one is much too detailed. And so I'm interested in the third one. The first one is useless. The second one isn't enough. The third one, which tells me, is this a good idea or a bad idea? That's what I want. How precise do I want to be? I don't want to be in more than 5 levels. Why? Because most public codes, laws, and regulations are presented to the public and the body politic in 5 levels and in these colors. Massachusetts has water quality which is labeled A, B, C, D, and E. And it's illegal to go from B to C. And people are happy when you go from C to B. But they have no idea how much dissolved oxygen is in the water. And it doesn't matter to them. That's the hydrologist's perspective. It's not the designer's perspective. By the way, I don't want a weighted index. I want an ordinal scale. I want the evaluation to be in an ordinal scale where I specify what needs to be protected and I specify what needs to be changed, and all the positions between have to be judged. It's not the product of a statistical analysis. It's the product of a judgment. So I want ordinal scales. The dynamics of scoping strategy. In the last couple of years, I've been involved with many colleagues, many of you are here, in at least 6 strategic models of scoping a geodesign project. I'll go through them really quickly. I'm afraid one of us is out of focus. It could be me. You have one decision model, meaning 10 systems ranked in some way for priority. You have one scenario, meaning the population is going to double. And you do one design. That's the classic, I've got a client, I've got a site, and I've got a program, and I'm going to make a design. But that doesn't deal with uncertainty. The second one says, I've got one decision model, the client, the mayor, the governor, whatever. But there are several scenarios, several sets in Alan Shearer's definition, several sets of assumptions which tell the story to which the design has to respond. The scenario is not the design. The scenario is the assumptions for the design. Therefore, you need many designs. And then you've got the most interesting problem of all. How do you get from many to one? The third system is you've got one scenario, but many different views of what's important, many political groups. So each one of those can make its own design. Don't expect these people to agree. Expect them to disagree. Make their own designs, and then you've got the problem of how do you get to various views to one design. The fourth one is you've got several decision models, but they each lead to a sequence of changes over time, two views of the future that are staged. So you might have two designs, but they're in time stages, and you have to reconcile different time stages of different attitudes, different scenarios. The fifth one, you've got one decision model, but many combinations of resources, policy, political will, etc. Each one of which has to be judged as an abstraction, and each combination of things creates a scenario, and each one of those needs a design, and you still have to come to one. And the final one, which is much more common than people will admit, and that is you have the scenario, you're speculating on the combinations, you're making the designs, and you're presenting them to let the client figure out what they really want. And then you can make a design. I've done them all. So the idea, I and my friends have done them all. So the idea that one design comes out is wrong. You're more likely to need a workflow in which groups of people say what's important, and then people who know a lot about the systems, and that's these people, they have to organize their data, their process models, their evaluation models, but they're likely to be 5, 6, 4, 10 designs, because each group has its own view of the world, and those are all different. Those diagrams are all different. And then you have to go from the synthesis stage to the problem of comparison. And so for the last 6 months, one of the things that Rishi Balal and I have been spending a lot of time on is not making the design, but how do you decide when you have a bunch of designs what to actually propose? And those are support tools that GeoDesign desperately needs. Tools for comparison and tools for negotiation. And that's what we're trying to build very rapidly. Now, the workflow itself, we've talked about this many times here. These are the things that turn out to be very important in my judgment. The first one is that some of these process models inside GeoDesign software, including ours, are purposefully simple. But these people are experts, and they've got models that are very complicated. And so you need a balance between having simple models to do diagrams and preliminary sketching, but you need access to very complicated models. So you need a way, through APIs or otherwise, of linking to external things, external services, external models, but don't try to build them into your software. It's foolish, because they're changing every day. The second thing that's important, don't accept the distinction between analysis and design and synthesis. The people who did the analysis part, building the evaluation process models and the evaluation, they know more about these subjects than you do. So get them to give you ideas. Get them to give you the ideas. Don't make that distinction between they, the scientists, and us, the designers. That's madness. And then anybody can add more diagrams. The mayor can add diagrams. Why not? And you have to be willing to deal with many kinds of synthesis. That's all on videotapes. I don't have to go through it. But I will say this, that if you're working in this middle scale where there is uncertainty, the combinatorial and constraining methods are the best ones to use. Don't try sketching. It won't work. The problem is too complicated. And the language is different. This can be done easily in sketching, a small project. Easily. Sketching won't help you when you're dealing with the globe. You need rule-based and mathematical models. But in the middle scale, systems-based diagrams, I think, are the best way to work. The fastest, the simplest, the roughest. But you can't do that when you're presenting a final design. You have to switch to a technology that works in detail. Diagrams are not details. Diagrams are an easy way to start thinking about a problem. But we're not building tools for diagrams, except we are and a couple of other teams. The next way that it really matters is, let's say that this is the existing conditions and you decided this diagram is a good idea. That diagram by itself updates the evaluation model and it has an impact. Supposing you have a group of diagrams, let's say your green infrastructure plan. That group updates all the evaluation models, and it has an impact. And finally, you have a final design. It has whatever you think you're supposed to be doing. And it updates the evaluation models and the impact models. But that process of updating and testing impacts is continuous. Now, it's not convenient because it takes time. But in the real world, you build anything and it updates the world. The other thing that's important is to be able to recognize the difference between a simple model and a complex model and know when you need it. And sometimes they're in regulations which do require you. Tim has a problem that he has to decide whether the salmon are alive or well in the future. It's a model. It's not a model that we can deal with inside a GIS software. It has to be outside. And finally, you have to have feedback, change of scale capabilities, and a way of showing it to people who need to decide if it's a good idea. I'm sorry, I wanted to say something else. And that process of saying, I've got 6 designs coming out of 6 different decision models, now I have to figure out how I'm going to compare them in order to make a decision. And I think that's crucial, absolutely crucial. The design is not the final product. The decision is the final product. To say it's a good thing, let's make it happen. And there are lots of ways of comparison. We could look at what they think is important, we can look at the design, we can look at timing, we can look at cost, we can look at system impacts, we can look at cross-system impacts. What does your change not do for your system, but for everybody else's system? We could look at where, which, and whose impacts are what. We could look at certainty versus uncertainty. We could look at frequency of selection. If everybody agrees it's a good idea, maybe it's a good idea. And we can build negotiation tools. All of these ought to be available. In fact, they are available. But it's not a good design just because you made it. That's for sure. The visualization dynamics. Well, it's very useful to work in 2 dimensions. 3 dimensions, by the way, I think 3 dimensions is the wrong definition. It's really useful to work in 2 dimensions. People have done it for 10,000 years. But you need standard color codes and standard words and standard things. It has to be standardized. You can't have every person in a collaboration invent their own language, their own color for something. It's a Tower of Babel. It's an old story, but it works badly, the Tower of Babel. I think the 3rd dimension is time and not height. So what you need to do is be able to record how something is supposed to change over time. I think the 4th dimension is height, and the 5th one is motion, and we've done them all. I mean, this is an example from Eric Whitner, 2012 City Engine, a very early version of City Engine, in the Soma, Japan example. But there's no time record. Whereas I think you need to keep track of the time of every piece of your design. I think that what I've been talking about is based on the idea that all aspects of GeoDesign workflow are dynamic. All of them are dynamic. And all update and change as the design is being made. I think that's what we should be aiming for. And I think this is generic to anybody's software, Esri's, anybody's. You need to have a workflow that has roughly those characteristics, including tools for negotiation support. And I think externally, you need a source of data, GIS operations, modeling capability, and visualization. And I think that that problem is more important because these people are also changing and you need the links. And therefore, I'm interested, frankly, in focusing on supporting the workflow at the beginning and diagrammatic stages of GeoDesign when all aspects of the GeoDesign workflow are most dynamic and all aspects can rapidly update or change as the design is being made. And keep it as simple as possible, easy to learn, set up, use, and most importantly, understand. So this is the strategy of what I've been working on and with Rishi, and well, Rishi's been doing the work, and testing in workshops for the last year. You have to work 10 systems, and this is arbitrary. I've talked about this last year. It's all on videotape. You want to work simultaneously in 10 systems. Not 1, not 3, but 10. 100 is too much. Some of those need externally linked models. Why? Because you need the complicated model and not the simple one. You have lots of different dimensions of decision making. And I think you need at least 6. And any one of them can go through versions. Version, 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 and change scale. Change scale. In any number of sizes and scales. And eventually you're going to produce 6 alternatives or fewer, maybe more. And you're going to have to say, how do I get from 6 to 1? And that's the piece that is the most important piece that we're weakest at. We all believe we're making one design. But what if you're making 6? Or what if they're making 6? Or 50, for that matter. And furthermore, all the evaluation models are in no more than 5 levels, and all the impact models are in no more than 5 levels, and they're in different color sets. Why? Because it's easy for people to track them. And we're going to work in diagrams. And what I want to show you now is I want to follow a diagram through a design. Diagram. A graphic that explains rather than represents. That's important. That was Stephen Irvin's paper on the very first GeoDesign conference. I'm not trying to represent data. I'm trying to explain how it works, which is quite different. Diagram, a graphic that explains rather than represents, especially a drawing that shows arrangement and relations. That's exactly what I want. I want arrangement and relation. So here are my 10 evaluation maps. By the way, red means I have to protect it. Green means I have to change it. That's what it means. We're sort of redefining what the color code is. And so first of all, I can take all of these evaluation maps and combine them in various ways and overlay them. We all know how to do that. And because of this combination of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these maps, I'm going to say I need to really protect this area right in here. And so I'm making a diagram, and I'm going to draw that diagram. And this diagram is associated with 2 things immediately: time and money. And that time is manipulable. It's a tool. I can say delay it 5 years and then make it in 10 years, and the costs associate themselves on a very simple model, on a unit-based model that Tim, in his work, set up with his graduate students. It counts the amount of area, it gives a unit cost, it divides it, and it's done. It's really simple. It's not a big calculation. So this diagram, I say, I like this diagram. And so there it is. You see it really small? And you see it among about 200 diagrams. You just scroll down, you see all the diagrams. So there's my diagram on top of the existing land use in Savannah, Georgia, and Chatham County. And the black is land that I'm not supposed to touch on any grounds at all because people are living there. And now what I've done is I've taken that diagram and I've asked Allison, who's out in the audience somewhere, to send me from a GIS operation that she has all the buffer zones of all the water in the county. It's not in my software. I don't want it in my software. I want the results in my software, and I want it colored in the color that I want to color it. And I can then say, let's get the impacts of this, and I can do all kinds of things. The impact of that one move, that's the only thing that's happened. Nothing has happened here. It has its own impacts. They're purple, they're good, but it has impacted all the other systems, and some don't like it. The housing people don't like that conservation strategy because I'm taking the land out of the marketplace. So its diagram is orange, which is bad. The ecologists like it because it's good, it's purple. So this analysis tells me whatever move you make, some people are going to be against you. And you build your coalition. And that one move changes the existing evaluations. This line down here is the same as that one, but those are the new ones. Press a button, updates. So now I can do the next part of my design. And I'm going to do the next part of my design. There's the next part of my design. There's the same diagram. There it is. There it is. But now I've added 50 other diagrams. 50 other diagrams, each with a timeline, and each with a budget of a total cost that diminishes and an annual cost given the project start at different times. And it goes through the same process. Now I've now done lots of different things, accumulated the impacts, and I still have good things going on, and some people are going to be very angry at what I'm proposing. And finally, the piece of property that I'm really interested in is the upper left-hand corner. So I can zoom in and I say, all these things are going in the county, but only these things are going in my site. And they have a cost, and that's a cost that I might be taxed on. Something like that. So that's one diagram, just following through. And I'm going to do these workshops with Rishi and Tess and others in anywhere from 6 hours to 2 days, with 30 people working simultaneously anywhere in the world, collaborating. Because I'm not the designer at these projects. These guys are running the workshops. They're running the workshops. So the first question is the why in the framework. Why are we doing this? And you need an interesting question. This is the question of the 4 case studies we're going to show you. The first one is Tim's. Are the King County, that's Seattle, King County, are the King County growth management regulations sustainable? They think they are, but are they? That's his case study. The second one is Prashant. In the 15th and 16th century, Hampi, India was one of the world's largest cities, this thing. How should the Hampi UNESCO World Heritage Area in Karnataka, India, manage growing tourism and regional prosperity? India is growing fast. Tourism is going to come. What should they do? The third case study is Orla. I'm going to present it with her. She's going to be on videotape. This is a village of 250, Malani, Ireland. How should Malani, Ireland, a village of 250 people, grow and change in the future? This is one where the villagers made the design by themselves. The fourth one, Barty's. How can the southern Cache Valley, Utah, double in population by 2030 and conserve its rural character? And finally, Allison is going to talk tomorrow about how can Chatham County, Savannah, Georgia, double in population by 2050 and respond to climate change? And how can Wormslow State Park respond to doubling tourism and climate change when that's what's going to happen according to the National Oceanographic and Space Agency? All of these projects require some things in front. You have to decide on your study area, you have to get existing data, you have to build evaluation models, which, as I said, is an ordinal scale where people have to judge what should be protected and what should be changed. They have to build the impact basics of what each kind of system does to the evaluation models and the basics of what each system does to every other system and a simple cost model and produce a set of evaluation maps. And finally, they're ready to begin their work. Tim.
So are King County Growth Management Regulations sustainable? As many of you know, I'm a professor of geography at the University of Washington. I have a program that is GIS for Sustainability Management. So sustainability is a big thing with me in GeoDesign. So in terms of the sustainability, we're looking at, rather than the city or county, we're looking at a watershed scale. So we're looking at 4 sub-watersheds here. The focus of the case study was in the lower Green River and the middle Green River because the Duwamish, lower Duwamish, was mostly industrialized and the upper Green is mostly forested. So there's a mix of land uses that are going on for that area. This is the land use map from King County that shows a lot of yellow on this map. The yellow is low density housing. That will be a big issue throughout this case study. So to be practical about this, it was at last year's GeoDesign Summit that I heard the Director of Research for the American Planning Association give a talk on comprehensive planning. I didn't hear the word geodesign in that presentation, but nonetheless, that really resonated with me because, those are really what the system elements should be. There should be a reason behind these system elements, what we have. So I'm going from the Washington State Growth Management Laws. These are the system elements that are required by the Washington State law. There are 39 counties and actually I don't know how many cities there are in Washington State that are planning according to growth management. So King County, the county in which City of Seattle is in, although it is the most populous county, City of Seattle is not the only city within that county. We're in south portion of King County, so there is Renton, Auburn, Kent, which are middle-sized cities, I would say, and this is how their 2012 plan lays out in terms of the chapters that we have, and then to identify the 10 subsystems, give me some rationale why we have these different subsystems. Identifying these systems as being things that change in the world. So Carl had mentioned that the world is changing out there, so these plans change as well. But from my perspective here, given that a few years ago I decided to jump into spatial temporal modeling, and that's where I've been for the last several years, what is the character of that step 2 in the GeoDesign framework? What kinds of spatial temporal modeling do we really need? And then we look at the cross impacts that are associated with those. So in this particular workshop, looking at watershed sustainability, we looked at the 10 systems, identifying 5 of the systems that are vulnerable to change, identifying 5 of the systems that are attractive for change. And these are more of the natural concerns that are out there. This is more of the built environment in terms of the way that these comprehensive planning elements lay out here. So, and here we have again the study area. The study area had to fit in this 8x8 box that Carl gave me some regulations as a cartographer. That was a little constraining for me in terms of what my GIS perspective might be. But nonetheless, it sort of really gave us an idea that the people who were part of this workshop really needed to have some area that they could get their hands really dirty with. And the 6 teams that we identified with those 10 systems, we asked each of the 24 members, there were essentially 3 and 4 members on each team, 6 teams. We had then each of them take a system and provide some project diagrams for each of these different systems. So they played the experts on these previous to them working anything with the evaluation change process that we were going through. So these 6 teams actually lay out quite interestingly. The pro-development teams, the pro-environment, so to speak, pro-conservation teams. The different teams aligned themselves each with a similar relax, maintain, or enhance, particular growth management policies that we were dealing with there. So we had, luckily, access to the University of Washington libraries where we had some portable large screen displays. We videotaped the whole thing, so if you want access to the sessions that are aired, it's on YouTube on the playlist. Just do a search on UW 2015 GeoDesign Workshop. You'll find them all there. So what we did in terms of pulling those teams together with development priorities and conservation priorities, we gave them, after they had played expert in some of those systems that we talked about, we had them together then identify what are the value structures that they have by virtue of playing for those particular teams that they were with, and then identifying how their systems would rank from left to right, highest priority to the lowest priority, as they could be reordered here. So we can see some of the, at a glance, how the individuals were doing, or how these teams were doing, and individuals within the teams were doing. What we did to start out with here with growth management, we had the Puget Sound Regional Council provide us some input for the population projection for this area, those 2 sub-watersheds. The population projection at about 300,000 to cover the 2 sub-watersheds, and we looked at about a 1.2% growth over time. It was a little bit of a simplification, essentially, out to 40 years, because normally you wouldn't linearly grow at that kind of rate here. But what we did then is took those numbers and the population numbers, which were driving the whole process forward because it's space for people. Although in Northwest it is space for salmon, it is space for orcas. Salmon is a big thing, but orcas are even a bigger thing, as it turns out, in the Northwest. And watersheds are a big thing with people and salmon in those watersheds. We're planning under Endangered Species Act in this local area. 6 species are endangered throughout the Pacific Northwest there. So we're presenting these targets for 20-year targets and 40-year targets for the different systems that we have. And Carl had alluded to before that red is protect that, green is go ahead and change it if you can. You'll notice here that there are some high-density housing and commercial industrial and the low-density housing, which are pretty much protected in terms of what it is we need in that particular space out there. So there's going to be an implication about the nature of this change that we have coming in terms of the cross impacts, as I'll say in a little bit here. So we have, again, as Carol had shown, a number of diagrams that we can develop for each of the different systems. And the one thing that we tested in this particular workshop was Rishi's new development of capabilities in terms of dynamic update. So without dynamic update, rapid turn taking with regard to collaboration, it's almost really difficult to come to any kind of sense of how you're doing in comparison to how others are doing in the design process here. So getting that rapid update by virtue of putting in a project and then showing the assessment, the evaluation map as the overall assessment, seeing how in fact your projects as you lay them out might in fact change the nature of the assessment that we're doing there. So we could see here the original evaluation maps up here, and then what we've got down here is again low density housing, high density housing, commercial, industrial, as they were changing over time with regard to the influences, cross impacts of other systems. Turns out growth management law, it is mandatory in growth management law to have transportation concurrently developed at least simultaneously with, or at least shortly thereafter, hardly as it ever done before, a transportation capacity for a commercial, industrial, or housing development, so that you need the transportation capacity before you can actually do the housing growth, so that we have happy people, as the case would be. So we can see some changes that went on in these particular areas where we had some developments in sewer and utilities, water, sewer, utilities, and transportation that will allow us to increase the low-density housing, the high-density housing, and commercial industrial in those areas. So again, this is one of the evaluation maps that we have with various of the systems turned on. As Carl had shown before, you can turn on any of the base maps that you want to there. Here we've got a shot here of the commercial industrial corridor. And it's this one that's in here in terms of the diagram grid that we have. And again, all of the systems being ramped from left to right in terms of the original system evaluation which was done. So here we've got the commercial industrial corridor that's in line with some of the one of the team's decision models that's out there in terms of this design, showing us what the ranking of the values that they have for each of the systems in relation to the character design that we have. 3 different teams here. This is the team essentially that is probably doing most of the most number of versions of any of the teams that were out there, but nonetheless, all of them did quite well there. Here we have the 6 teams that each of their plans for the 20-year horizon, the 40-year horizon. So here we have 2035, 2055 in terms of the nature of differences that we have. Again, yellow is the low-density housing, magenta is the commercial industrial. The interesting thing here is about the yellow. We see yellow in 2 and 6 here. We see the rest of the teams not having much at all about those, and that will show up here later on. Here we've got the information structures, at least that I call them, in terms of various visioning of the situation with regard to the design, with an overall equally weighted impact for the index that is going on, with the total amounts of acres in development. Here we have the different grids. Synoptically, we can see the character of utilities and transportation in these 2 design teams, where we don't have that much going on in the other design teams. So a couple of the design teams really focusing on the transportation issue, interestingly enough, even though they are all required to do some transportation here. I think maybe here's an excuse down here for grid number 30, where this is team number 1 again with the most number of versions throughout. Here we've got the essentially a potential agreement between the 6 teams that are doing. Here we're looking at the different projects that are similar actually among the different teams. We move to the sociogram here in terms of identifying what are the teams that are potentially alike so that they could actually negotiate a little bit easier here. So we're looking at the partnering and likely not partnering circumstances here. So down we have teams 2 and 6 that are mainly focusing on, it turns out, mostly environmental with some housing and mostly housing here for those two teams, and then the rest of them, not much low-density housing at all in those two teams. And that's sort of how they align themselves out. But of course, in terms of comprehensive planning, how can you do a comprehensive plan without any low-density housing? It's pretty difficult to do that in any practical world out there. So we need to come together, and then over the 40-year horizon here, we have teams 1 through 6 that are really then coming to an agreement here in terms of some amount of housing that's there, with a lot of the corridor development that's going on and the critical area, protected area that's out here. So again, the same design that we're seeing there is the final design, with some presentation of where are the nature of the projects that we're not quite close on in terms of the uncertainty with regard to the designs that are showing up in that final design. Here, a synoptic view of the a few of the 17-odd versions that team number 1 did. One was a team member was the director of the Department of Natural Resources Stormwater Division. Another was associate professor in landscape architecture. And a third person was a software developer and decision support. And a guy who's doing the decision support was driving the system, essentially. So that's why maybe 17 different versions here. The existing land use with regard to the King County plan for 2015, land use 40 years out. So if I go back and forth here, we do see that there's some amount of consistency there in terms of what the actual plan in terms of existing land use is right now and what we might find for the future. And I'll turn it over to Prashant.
Are they sustainable?
Oh, and a question, sorry, in terms of the overall evaluation. The concern here actually is that there's a growth management boundary. One of the things that I actually should have said that I didn't say here. Urban growth boundary goes through right about here. The sustainable nature is that there will have to be more high density housing, even though the regs right now say that more low density housing will be there. But they won't get there in terms of the amount of population growth that we have if the city regulations themselves don't change to higher density housing in those particular areas.
Prashant.
So what we have here is a old capital which is in the ruins right now, and it's been one of the most visited historical site in India. It was one of the last capitals of the Hindu king of Vijayanagara, and it is one of the very spectacular places, not just visited by Hindus for the temples, but also because of the terrain and because of the monuments and everything included, has a very, it's a backpacker's paradise, and so it has a sizable number of Indian as well as foreign tourists who come there. So what we did was, this was a workshop that was, sorry, this is some slides here. Okay, so this is what it looks like, and that size is roughly about 30 square kilometers, including and plus about 190 square kilometers of buffer zone around it. So there are temples, there are rocks around it. It's beautiful, spectacular site. I have to admit that I haven't been there, but it's one of my father's favorite place to do watercolors. So this also had an extensive irrigation system, which was it was actually a whole city, which had at one point had 500,000 people living there, and was the second largest city after Beijing in 1500s. And so it had extensive irrigation networks, water harvesting systems, and that was the one that completely ran on the gravity system. It's also next to this famous river called Tungabhadra, which runs just around the edge of the northern edge of the city. So what we actually did was, this was a workshop that was managed by Rishi and Carl from London at University College, UCL, and I was at Davis, and there's a whole team of 30 plus people, which included sociologists, hydrologists, had people from Archaeological Survey of India, who are the ones who manage the World Heritage Sites, and a lot of people who work on the livelihood issues, tourism, and it was managed by a landscape architect called Mohan, and he runs a firm called Integrated Design Management Systems. And this was hosted by Indian Institute of Information Technology in Bangalore, which is where we needed a good infrastructure for connectivity and everything. So what we did was, we had about 10 of the themes that went through initial evaluations. Surya Prakash from World Resources Institute helped them put together the whole base maps and the data, preparation of the base data. So we had agriculture, historical, cultural, visual management, transportation, ecology, water, housing, visitors, and commercial. And so we had these evaluation diagrams that we used. So this was the first initial evaluation model overlaid. The one that you see in the middle, that dark area is the constraints that you don't need to touch, and you can't touch there, and it's very well protected. So these are the ones that are turned on as transportation, housing, visitors, commercial, and constraints on that. And this is where Rishi was managing the diagrams that he received from after the 32 people who were professionals who were working in Bangalore. They made their diagrams, and Rishi was managing them and overlaying them in London. These are the different diagrams that different teams selected: agriculture, historical, cultural, visual management team. I was part of the visual management team, and I was actually conversing with students over there and people over there on WhatsApp, and we were trying to use phones, and this Skype was going on, and while Rishi was actually managing this whole thing in London. And this is where the teams were negotiating. They're starting to work with each other. They're looking at there's 6 teams looking at how to get different projects in, different designs in, and different policy inputs. These are the different 6 designs, best versions of the 6 teams that they came up with: international tourism, local village life, local village tourism, and also the Karnataka government, what they are doing over there. And Mohan had a very good insight into this because he'd been working there for almost 15 years. And these are the different, what we're looking at is comparison of alternative designs and what would be the impact of each of them in terms of costs and also in terms of timelines. We were looking at all these same designs. And as you can see, there was not much of a, not much of a agreement on these things. And so we had several different overlaps by different teams. And this is what made it a little difficult. And these are the different diagrams, thumbnails that people are using for who selected, how many groups selected which design for which particular theme. And this is what only thing that we agreed on, and that's what made it a very interesting thing, because then we had to get into a point where we had to get into a negotiation. And this is where Carl got them both together, both the 2 teams together, and they were actually discussing, and he was managing the negotiation from London. And this is what the 2 designs, what we compared with. And as you move around, you can see that there were main things that everybody agreed on was that these rivers needs to be protected and some tourism needs to be developed, and ecologically the landscape needs to be conserved. These are when you get into the filtered by systems, we look at the different areas that would be going and being developed around, and this is again a comparison. And this is again as seen in London on Rishi's screen, and then this is what was the final design that came up with, and I think we should leave it at that, right? That's the final design. Okay, thank you.
What I'm going to do now is skip really rapidly through one project and then end up with parties. And so just trust me, I'm just doing this this is the village of Malani. This is the view from the John Lennon suite. And that's the view 3 hours later. This is a village which lost its population in the potato famine. It went from 500 to 250. And a hotel was built, but by the year 2004, the hotel was bankrupt, destroyed, the railroad was torn up. It was a miserable place. But somebody invested in 2005, that's only 10 years ago, in the new hotel, and they decided, the villagers, to build themselves a reputation on heritage as an industry. And then they decided to make a bicycle path from the old railroad. And all of a sudden, 250,000 people discovered this place. And they've won all kinds of prizes. And this, in the lower left, is Orla Murphy. She's a professor of architecture at University College London, and I had lectured there, and she called me and said, we want to make an arrangement with this village as a study focus for 5 years. Let's do a workshop.
As part of an ongoing collaboration between Malani and UCD, we wanted to explore whether community-led design might have a role to play in shaping the future of Malani village and its surrounding landscape. Malani faces particular challenges and opportunities over the next 20 to 50 years, including how its population base might grow and how it might expand local enterprise while safeguarding its extraordinary natural landscape. How might it better and more efficiently use its local natural resources, including water, access to the coast and the sea, and energy? GeoDesign seemed like a challenging and appropriate way to try to test some of these challenges and to bring together really rich local community knowledge together with external experts and members of the local authority from architecture, planning, engineering, and for those 3 cohorts to come together to try to address some of the challenges facing the community.
And there are the villagers making their designs. We taught them in 1 hour how to make a diagram. And this is the most important thing. They refused to use GIS because they said nobody in GIS knows the data that we know, having lived here for several generations. So what they did was they took 10 big maps, divided into 10 expert teams, and the expert teams made their notes on the maps. It's a GIS, but it's an analog GIS. And then on the first hour of the workshop, they drew the equivalent of a GIS map by hand and made these evaluation maps. It took them 1 hour. Then each expert team produced 10 or so diagrams, and then we divided them into socially defined groups: environment, old people, young people, tourism, agriculture, and enterprise. And the farmers became the agriculture team. The tourist operators became the tourism team. And they decided that they wanted 250 more people. They wanted to go back to the population of 1850. And they made their designs, their first designs. And then they made something that was very interesting. I told them, why don't you talk to each other? You've been talking to each other for 5 years. So don't stay in your team. Talk to other teams and steal their best ideas that help you. So the idea that the team is not a thing by itself, but is actually able to borrow and steal from other teams if it helps them. We did that actively. These people were then running around the table. And this is, each team made about 2 or 3 versions. This is the versions 1, 2, and 3. They had to pick the best one. Then they had their 6 designs. And then they showed them 2 minutes each. And then we started to compare them. And we looked at the frequency of which people agreed on. And they had a high degree of potential agreement. A lot of people, I mean, these people have been thinking about this for years. How do we get more people? And then we did a sociogram, which says who wants to work with who. And everybody liked the agricultural team. So it really became the young people and the old people versus the developers-oriented people. It was a very interesting experience. And then they were able to compare and negotiate by a filtering system by system. So these maps are actually different, and they're able to negotiate by focusing on the issue of negotiation. They don't look at the whole design. They look at the pieces system by system. It makes it really easy to negotiate. And then eventually they said, this is what we agree on. That's our design. But there's the timeline, and there's the budget that they did. This is all a 2-day workshop. There's the impacts. But the most interesting thing at the end was they couldn't agree on the housing. There was no agreement. So these are all the housing sites that were proposed for development, but they simply couldn't agree. So we said, thank you very much. We've done 80% of the problem. Everybody's happy. Let's have a Guinness.
I was really pleasantly surprised by the ability and facility of all 30 participants in using this GeoDesign methodology and Hirishi's online platform. People who hadn't used computers in many years were sitting in teams designing into the computer and into the online platform. It's extremely easy to use, and this was proven by the fact that everybody was up and running within the first hour or 2 of the workshop. And the mixture of local community stakeholders, local authority members, and experts in landscape design, architecture, planning, wildlife and ecology were all pulling together as teams to create both the first evaluation and the change models. Another, I suppose the main other positive outcome that I saw emerging from the process was that this is co-design in action. This is the community working, informed by experts and supported by the local authority through this methodology. And the methodology removes ego completely from the equation. No design is off the table. Everything is there to be tested and to be tested objectively through the methodology. Thirdly, because this isn't a consultative type of design, it's not top down, it's not presented by the local authority and then responded to by the community. It's the community creating the design in a participatory context with the local authority and informed by experts. And this means that the community has ownership of these 6 designs that they came out with. They're their designs, and they're now there for them to be able to use, to debate in the wider local community, to take forward if they choose to do so. And because the design is based in this open source online platform, they can come back to them, they can tweak them, they can change slight parameters and revisit the models in the future. So I would think in all that the model has been extremely successful for Malani. It's the first time that GeoDesign was trialled in Ireland, and I would hope to see that it's the first of many such workshops that will take place.
Barty.
What you're looking at here is Utah State University up in Logan, Utah, and we were looking at the valley around the Cache Valley, which is surrounded by mountains. And this is a Mormon valley. 70% of the people are Mormon. The families are big. The population will double in 15 years. And most of those people are people that are living there. Only 30% of the population the increased population is from outside. So this is a real problem for them. They love families, but where are they going to put them? You see a little bit of this arid landscape. This is the Platte of Zion, the grid shape. That's the typical historical town. In this area, it's green because the Mormons have created an extensive system of canals. So anything that's green there is the water from the mountains that's been tapped for agriculture. If you remember, there were 2 mountains that sort of create a bowl shape. And not only is water a problem and population growth, but also climate or air pollution because they have winter inversions. Program of change, double the housing, commercial, provide transportation that's alternative, that doesn't add more air pollution. Protect your water, quality and quantity. Agriculture, and this is very important for them, is their agricultural character. That is part of the pioneer spirit here. So with this program of change, about 10 students in the bioregional planning program, they did all the work, they developed the evaluation models, a lot of the things that Tim had set up for us, thank you very much. And we had a 1-day workshop. Carl visited us, and we had about 30 participants, 10 of them students, local stakeholders, experts, et cetera. And Big Brother Rishi was in the background waiting for problems. Thank goodness he was there. Okay, they made their diagrams. You've seen all the diagrams. This is a very interactive time. These are great discussions, very straightforward. There was very little trouble with understanding how to do it. I should say there were 10 teams, 10 systems, and each student that had developed the evaluation model was sort of head of those different systems, or those system teams. And then they broke up into stakeholder groups, young, old, environmentalists, farmers, regional planners, and the students were the team leaders. It was important for me to see how this fit into the curriculum of the bioregional planning program. So they all came up with different ideas. If you look here, and I know I don't want to go into them, but the developers and the young people had very similar kinds of ideas. Also, the old people, the colors are a little different, but in contrast to what happened in some of the other workshops when they did a comparison or a sociogram here, it was actually everybody wanted to work with the developers. Nobody wanted to work with the farmers. Kind of an interesting contrast and dynamic. Good. Each group went through iterations of designs. They came up with their final designs, and the software allowed them to compare them. This is comes up later on because I've bring this up a little bit later. Okay, so this is the diagram of frequency. We've been through this. We've picked out the diagrams that occurred most frequently. This is the design that we got. The yellow is solar energy, renewable energy. The green is protect agricultural land. Also, there's a big recreational hub there, and they're protecting the river that runs through there. As I said, the developers, the young people, the old people, and the developers, they all negotiated with each other. And then the regional planners and the farmers, and there's one more group that I can't remember, but they negotiated. And I should say that the workshop ended prior to the negotiation. We didn't have enough time. So the students did this in the studio in peace and quiet. And each student represented a different group. They went through the different systems. They could negotiate what they agreed upon, what they didn't agree upon. It was really quite clear and straightforward. Then they finally came up with a final design where they all more or less agreed with it. It's a little bit wild, but the hatch is policy and the solid are projects. You can see that they can agree on a lot of policies here. The projects were a little bit more difficult to agree upon. And then they sat down and said, okay, we're going to plan this out, plan the implementation. And there are a lot of projects and policies going on there. And the thing that really helped them do this was to look at the costs down at the bottom. They actually moved the timeline, or moved the projects and policies around in the timeline to see if they could spread out the costs more evenly. So that was a very interesting dynamic that went on in that sort of planning. They also looked at the impacts of their different systems. So purple is good, orange is bad. Here it looks like some systems did better than other systems. This is the final design. If you look at it, these are how each system performed for itself. So the purple is where each system achieved the goals that they were trying, or objectives they were trying to achieve. So it looks like, and I didn't explain the topography, but sort of this purple snake up the side is one river, and it empties into a marsh area. Ultimately, that river empties into the Great Salt Lake. The next one shows the interaction between the systems. So what are the impacts of the systems on each other? And you can see up at the top that where it looked like every system was achieving its goals, there's also a great deal of potential conflict between the systems. And my final slide, I did try to evaluate the workshop, and I also tried to evaluate the students' experience through the GeoDesign module, which was 8 weeks long. Here are the workshop, the post-workshop survey. And basically they're saying that they really liked working together. It is a collaborative platform. I asked up here, do you feel that you know or that you better understand the planning opportunities and constraints, and what helped you? And I think it's important, this project comparison, being able to look at them and compare them is a real strength of that whole process. The workshop structure, well, Carl knows how to lead these workshops, he really does, and the teamwork. These are all this collaboration, working with each other. And that's something that the students said as well, that probably a highlight for them was being able to work with professionals and learn from them. And perhaps this last one, what did you like about it? Well, group work, software, process. So there's something going on here that really is, it's working. People are enjoying it. And they're learning from it.
These are the projects that we're going to do in the next 4 months, roughly one a month. And we're selecting these because they're really different. This is Arizona State University West Campus, the Thunderbird Medical Center, and the Thunderbird School of Global Management in a totally developed part of Phoenix, which the schools want to collaborate. And the question is, what kind of change in the environment will enable that collaboration to be symbolically understandable and functional? The second one is, what do you do with the way of Jesus from Nazareth to the Sea of Galilee? It's rapidly growing Christian and Muslim Arab villages on the northwest and rapidly growing Jewish villages and towns and cities on the southeast. And the Christian pilgrims go on the Roman road between them. And how do you make this feel to the Christian pilgrims like it's the path that Jesus trod? That's the problem. The next one is, you're going to see the Savannah one, but we have been asked by the Coastal Zone Commission to study 10 counties, each making their own plan, each linking to a geodesign study, and we're going to do that with the University of Georgia and the Georgia Coastal Commission in April. So we're going to deal simultaneously at 4 scales. The final one is all of Sardinia. The next, actually, it's not the final one. There are two more. One is UCL, the University College London, is building a huge campus on the site, part of the site of the Olympic Park in London, in partnership with Intel. And the question is, how do you make a campus design in a geodesign framework? And for that, you need three-dimensional diagrams and three-dimensional impact models. That's not simple. We've tested that, but we don't know how to do it really. And finally, the last one, 7,000 square kilometers, the Quadrilatero Ferreiro in Minas Gerais, Brazil, which is the largest domestic producer of iron. It's a miserable environment. And right in the middle of it is Ouro Preto, which is a World Heritage Site. What now? And what we're going to basically do is not be in the data business, not be in the GIS business, not be in the external model business, not be in the visualization business, but we're really going to try hard to make the design process easier. Thank you. Thank you. We're around. Ask us questions tomorrow. Thanks for coming.